Clean they like riding, but I know that they ain't. Ride or die. I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die.
Alrighty guys, just a short intro. So in this video I'll be discussing, first starting off divine simplicity, then going into defending a little bit of a Trinity model, getting some pushback from the Muslim metaphysician, one of the top two critics, I would say, him and Tuggy. Like if you're looking for criticism of the Trinity, that is who you want to read. And if you can start addressing their arguments and their challenges, then majority of people you're just going to be able to bat away. You also see in the video that I get a little bit frustrated when Tom jumps in. Tom has every right to jump in. It is his room. He set the table. We're all in there. If I don't like it, I can always leave. But so you'll see that point of frustration. You'll see how I think sometimes I was not as clear or concise with my point as what I wanted to be. And I think that's because right now, this particular Trinity model is something that I'm rolling around in my head. I'm absolutely convinced in the one being three persons, and that's the first move when you're looking at this philosophically. That's also what the Bible teaches. Now, it's cashing that out and deciding what, philosophical model of the Trinity I want to hold to. And so as I grow, learn in theology, I'm going to hopefully get more redefined in it. I'm going to hopefully get greater understanding of my faith, digging through systematic theologies, learning and growing. God willing, that'll be a progressive step. But I'm going to go ahead and stop yammering and cut to the video.
Well, I'm not a Shia for a number of reasons, but one primarily because I reject the doctrine of divine simplicity, and that's fundamental for them.
I think John adheres to divine simplicity.
I think he's flirting with it. I don't know if he's like all the way.
Does John even understand what the doctrine of divine simplicity is? That's a better question.
No.
I mean,
that's a good question.
Why do you reject it, Jake? Out of interest.
Because I think it's incoherent. I mean, I can give arguments for it, but
yeah.
I thought you took like Mullen's position too, that it results in like a modal collapse, where like the angle is equal to the love. And
yeah, I mean it does. I mean that's one argument, modal collapse, but you can simply bite the bullet as some Islamic thinkers did, and they were more willing to do that actually in the Islamic tradition rather than the Christian tradition. And in some sense, they were actually more faithful to the philosophical underpinnings that they were adopting. So they were more willing to accept that. Whereas the Christian tradition is much more averse to that for some reason. But yeah, I reject it because one reason is it entails modal collapse, which I think is problematic, and a number of other reasons.
I remember Elias saying that he acknowledged modal collapse, and he said basically he's okay with it. He just didn't, and I think Dr. Khalil is the same thing. I think they just acknowledge it, and they don't have a problem.
Who are you talking about, John? Who are you talking about, John?
Elias and Dr. Khalil, they were talking about divine simplicity and modal collapse, and they, while acknowledging it, they said they didn't have a problem with it.
Yeah, I think I remember maybe saying something like, good, you want to accept modal collapse or something like that.
No, but originally, truth be told, that Khalil didn't actually accept modal collapse when he first came on the clubhouse until I started using some arguments against his position to show him the problems with divine simplicity. And through that line of argumentation, he eventually just bit the bullet and accepted modal collapse.
Yeah, because he's an necessitarian.
Yeah, but he didn't originally hold that position. That's what I'm trying to explain before he spoke to me.
So if you accept modal collapse, that entails you committed to necessitarian?
Yeah,
You're a necessitarian?
yeah.
Yeah, John can't figure out if he's a necessitarian or not.
Well, I know
Uh,
Johnny Hoss is, so if
well,
Delano's theory is correct, then that would mean that John Lee would have to be.
well, I think he is after creation, but not before. Is that fair, John?
Something like that. I do believe that God has libertarian free will in the sense that He could either create or not
Prior
create. I
sans
think.
creation, he has libertarian free will.
Yeah, Johnny Hoss
Hey,
thinks
Jake,
that's it.
I am curious because um, I seem to like want to bite the bullet and say divine simplicity is the only way to make a theistic God model work. But how would you explain like not holding to divine simplicity and not winding up with a God that has temporal parts?
I believe that God is temporal, first of all, so I don't really have a problem with that.
But
But
you'd be okay with temporal parts, though.
What, James? What do you mean by
depends what you mean by part.
parts? I don't
Depends
know.
what you mean by parts.
Yeah.
But
What?
I
What?
don't have a problem with temporality, first of all. Um, but I don't see any motivation for a Christian Trinitarian to believe in divine simplicity because it's just completely incompatible with divine simplicity.
Right, because the Trinity are like parts, like the persons of the Trinity.
Well, I mean, they don't want to say that, but
Yeah.
um,
How can they?
the persons are not identical to each
Right.
other, so there's real distinctions within God, and classical notion of divine simplicity is going to reject that. So you can call it divine simplicity, but um, and do things like Thomas Aquinas believed in divine simplicity, but I don't think it's actually divine simplicity. And this would be, the Muslims that hold to divine simplicity, they don't accept the Trinity at all as being compatible
Yeah.
with divine simplicity. So it's just using the name, but I don't think it's actually faithful to the doctrine. And yeah, so I don't see any way that you could have divine simplicity on a Trinity. And I'm always shocked when Christians actually think it's a good thing to have as part of their doctrine and theology. I don't know, why do you think that is, James?
I,
Especially in
I
Trinitarian
have to
concept.
send you. I have to send you what I was reading because you'll probably understand it uh, better than when I was going through it. But I think that you need divine simplicity within the Trinity, or else you're stuck biting the bullet that you have at least three things you're describing, which I think would lead to partialism, and then you have to bite that bullet. And I don't know that you want to say like that God is three parts of a whole. Like I would not want to do that. But I think divine simplicity um, puts those together, even if you have to maybe bite the bullet of some kind of modal collapse.
No, but I mean, the question is, how do you have a real distinction in the essence of God, um, and still call that divine simplicity? In other words, the Father and the Son and the Spirit are not identical to each other. So you have real distinctions in the essence.
I think it would have to be an apparent distinction, as in how God is relating to us. But within
Yeah,
God, within Himself, there would not be.
okay. But that's a big problem because that's going to then just be like some type of modalism, and the distinctions are not real. They're not real relations and real distinctions in the essence. It's just an epistemic, from an epistemic point of view. You're just saying that's how it appears to us. And that's certainly not what a Trinitarian is going to want to say.
I mean, I think that some of them may bite that bullet with subordinationism. I'm not sure which type of which
Subordinationism.
one.
How are you going to say subordinationism? I mean, that's even worse because now you have a
Well, there's
greater
four different
distinction being
views
made.
of subordinationism. There's a couple that would work fine with
No,
Trinity models.
yeah, I get that, James. I understand there are different types of subordinationism, but
Mhm.
the point is, if you have subordinationism of any type within the Godhead, that's only going to exacerbate the problem and make it clearer that there are these real distinctions in the essence. And so, you're going to have a greater problem with divine simplicity.
How so if they're using the subordinationism that's not within God, but how God is relating to us? So it
Do
would
you
almost
believe
be,
that? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess a simple way to put it is almost would be the appearance of subordinationism, but it's not really.
Yeah, but then you're just going back to the same thing. You're just using a label and saying, oh, it seems this way, but it's not actually this way. But we're talking about the Trinity in itself. We're not talking about like appearances of it or anything. We're concerned
Gotcha.
with what actually is the case, not what appears to
You're
be.
discussing the ontology of it, not the. Yeah.
And have you read Dr. Josh's new paper?
Which one is that? He's been coming out with a paper like every month.
He just came out with a new one on the
Okay.
Trinity within
I
the
think he
past
sent it to me.
couple of months. I think he sent to me too. I'm going to read that sometime tonight or tomorrow, but I would love to get your thoughts on that because I know you mentioned he has the I guess we'll just say it, the three God problem where you believe that he's conceding and actually admitting that technically speaking there would be three gods.
Well, hold on a second. Am I just merely making the claim that he's saying that, or is he actually saying that?
I haven't seen the clip yet, so I
I,
don't
I
know if
believe
there's
I believe I sent it to you. I mean, we
sorry.
could make it be pin it to the top, but I think it's quite clear. It's only a minute and a half long, and
Yeah.
he literally says that there are three gods, and he actually makes the statement that monotheism is not to be categorized by the number of gods that there are. So, would you agree with that statement?
I would think monotheism is one God. I would disagree with that. If you said you sent it to me, let me go back. It's possible that I
Thought
have
I
not
did, but
watched that
I'll
one
I'll
yet.
send it again right now. And
Jake, if you want to send it to me, I can pin it.
okay, give
Because you've
me
sent
give
me
me
a
just
lot
one
of
second.
interesting things to read.
No, this isn't to read. This is just a short video that's like a minute and 30 seconds long, and it was clipped out, I think, from an interview that Josh had with Dale Tuggy, and he was kind of pressing him on this issue because um, I mean, there are a number of logical problems. It's usually called the logical problem of the Trinity, but there's more than one actually, and Tuggy's kind of identified that. So I don't know if you've seen my one of my most recent videos on this, James, but I go into the distinction between the identification problem and the tritheism problem. And so Josh, he has a potential solution to the identification problem of who is God, and he identifies him as the Father. But then he has the other problem of tritheism, which there's three gods in a lowercase g sense. And I don't think he solves that. He just bites the bullet and says, yeah, in a certain sense, there are three gods.
Yeah, I would have to go back and I'm gonna watch that clip for sure. I do need to reach out to have him back on again. Maybe I can play that clip for him and ask him if he believes in three
That would be
gods.
kind of
Because I'd
awkward.
like to get his. I, I'm gonna tell him I'm gonna do it first. He's a
Yeah.
friend. I'm not gonna blindside somebody.
Yeah, I mean, he's a friend of mine too. But to be quite honest with you, I don't really have much interest in reading any of his other papers on the Trinity or incarnation, just because, I mean, he's already conceded the fact that there are three gods in the Trinity. And he's also conceded to me directly in Speaker's Corner that not only the Son and the Spirit, but the Father as well is a contingent being. And I also find that deeply problematic. So
Yeah, that would be
I don't think
problematic.
there's really much else for me to read from him on that. Haiti, I think I send you. I sent you the link.
Okay, let me see.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can't ever say God is contingent. I would agree on that.
yeah, but you also wouldn't want to say they're three gods, right?
No, you wouldn't want to say there's three gods either.
Yeah. So I think Josh has been kind of pushed as far as he can be pushed. And once a Christian is willing to say that God is contingent and there are three gods, I don't really think there's much else you can do.
Yeah, what was the context of contingent? Because he last time I heard him talk to you, he maintained that the Father has aseity, and that he took aseity as not being a great making property, and then it was fine that the Son and the Spirit did not. But it seemed like the Father was not contingent. So what did he say that then changed that?
Um, so there's this argument that's actually related to the aseity argument, and why he tries to argue that aseity is an extrinsic property rather than an intrinsic property. And he uses a certain classification by David Lewis and Langton, in which it's basically a way of classifying intrinsic versus extrinsic properties. And I mean, it's kind of detailed discussion, but trying to summarize it, certain assumptions regarding that classification of the intrinsic versus extrinsic attribute distinction is problematic, and it's been pointed out that it's specifically problematic when it comes to the idea of necessary beings, which Lewis didn't really take into account very much. Um, and so, anyway, I ran a particular argument based on that would entail that if you hold to that way of classifying these things, it would entail that God is not actually metaphysically necessary. And Josh sort of just bit the bullet and said, "Well, yeah, if that's the case, fine. There's really no problem. I can accept that God is contingent."
Gotcha. So you're saying he conceded to the argument and said that if this argument follows, then God would be contingent. But you're not saying that's his actual current position.
I think it is. I would have to ask him privately. I can ask him, but I think it is his actual position, because he's more concerned, and what he basically says in the video when he was speaking to me, that he doesn't really think that necessity is uh, necessary. What he thinks is more important, or sufficient anyway, is fundamentality. So as long as God is fundamental in the way that he describes anyway, he doesn't really think that God has to be a necessary being. So that's his rationale for it. But I obviously I think it's false.
Yep, definitely interesting. I'll have to go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, so it's not just about aseity, because he's already granted a long time ago that the classical Nicene Trinitarian position is that the Son and the Spirit are not ase. Um, but this is something else where he's talking about in terms of the Trinity in its modal status. And he does not believe, or at least he was willing to grant, that the Trinity is not necessary metaphysically. And actually, the same type of thing happened. I don't know if you saw my discussion with Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones, but
Yes,
I brought up the same point, and he actually said the same exact thing, and mentioned Josh as well. And he said, "Well, yeah, I don't really know." He said, "I'm thinking about it, and I'm not really sure. I don't think that necessity it may be all that important." And
yeah,
he actually mentioned Josh.
I think that that his approach, even though I've never seen the show Moon Knight, so I can't really give a good synopsis on that. But the way he's describing it, I think that as a Christian, I think you have to go more towards the is of identity, and then define what you mean by uh, God's identity. But I don't think predication is necessarily the best way to go, because I mean, in one way you can define three things as one, but then you still have three things. It's just basically like language. And so I don't know if I like that path as far as the Trinity model goes. I think you have to go back to identity, but I'm not a fan of being like a relative identity Trinitarian, because I think that there could be some cost in sacrificing that. I mean, I do think like the law of indiscernibles is misapplied to the Trinity, and I think they start at the beings and they work back to the person when they should start, or sorry, the persons and then work back to the being. I think they should start at the being and work to the persons, but that might be like another objection.
Yeah, James, I've heard you say that a number of times, and I think you have some confusion about how identity works. So
Yeah,
if
that's why I was mentioning it for you, because you're one of the better people that I know to critique it, um, and to tell me where I'm wrong on it.
yeah, so if you think that two things are really just one thing in the sense that they're identical to each other, then it doesn't matter which term you quote unquote start with, so to speak. If they're just two terms that are interchangeable for the same thing and they just co-refer, it doesn't matter whether you start with the being or start with the person, whatever that means.
Well, the
It's going to
thing
be
is, you're starting with the one God, so then that one God is being split based on the perspective. So I think that if you start backwards instead of forwards, I think that you have a problem. I think you have to start with God's nature. I don't think you can start with the Father, Son, and Spirit and then critique back to God's nature. I don't think that's how God's identity has been portrayed.
yeah, but again, I think you're just confused because um, if I ask, is the Father identical to God, I could just ask in the reverse, is God identical to the Father? There's no difference in that question.
Yeah, but so you're saying if they take the position.
Why would you think that?
So
Sorry.
I'll ask this real quick and then let
Yeah, why would
Concrete
you
ask
think
one.
that?
So,
Well, I mean, I could answer, but I don't know if James wants to finish. It's up to you, James.
I was gonna say, you're saying that based on if they're taking the position that they're not identical, like they're already contrasting them, then they can't make that move. They have to start with that.
Yeah, because the idea is if you say God is the Father or you say the Father is God, and the is in both statements is functioning as an is of identity, and there's not really anything different about this statement. What's the difference?
So would you say that if my hand, I'll make this quick, then Concrete can go, or not Concrete, sorry,
Bruh.
sorry,
We keep calling
Converse.
him concrete, dude. That's kind of rude.
Yeah, sorry. Concrete is this other guy. Hasn't been on in a while.
Yeah, you're getting
But
blocked, man.
so
So it's always a compliment to be mistaken for
Right,
concrete.
right, exactly.
so you would say that the logical alternative is that if you don't do that, then you're forced into partialism, because you're saying that there is a distinction, but it's a
Bro, how is it
distinction
that we're
from
stuck
the
on
whole.
this? Like, dude, all he's trying to get nailed down so far right now is if you're using the is of identity, and you said it's not the is of predication, I'm assuming you're using the is of identity, then the is just serves as an equal sign. Doesn't matter if you say 4 is equal to 4. Doesn't matter if you switch the 4s. It's just an equal sign. So if you're saying the Father is God, it's equivalent to God is the Father. If you're using the is of identity, yes or no, do you agree? And then move on.
You missed my question, Tom.
Oh my
My
God.
question was, I think, a sincere and a good question, which is that means that you would end up falling into partialism, which was my question to Jake. If he thought
No,
by starting with the being, and then you
no,
say that there's three parts of the whole.
not necessarily. I don't. I guess I'm a bit confused about this language of starting with the being or starting with the persons. I don't really know what you mean by that.
So I'm envisioning. Let me see something. I always hate using like an example for God. That's always so. I'm envisioning. All right, I'm gonna hate myself for this one. We're gonna use an eggshell, or the egg and the eggshell. So we're identifying that as the egg, and so its identity is an egg. You would say that it loses its identity when you divide them, correct?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand your question, bro.
So the egg has the identity as an egg. It's always going to be an egg, but within that egg, you have the shell, the yolk, etc.
Yeah, but James, what I'm saying is, when you're trying, what we're trying to get at is with the question, um, or the thought basically is what is the relationship between the quote unquote being or whatever term you want to substitute for that and the persons? That's basically what the question is what is the relationship between them, right? So it doesn't really matter if you characterize it as an identity relation, then this idea of starting with one over the other, I guess I'm not really understanding what the relevance is. I don't know what that means, starting with one over
I
the other.
all,
You're just
all you
saying,
have to do is
yeah, go ahead.
I've already said this. I've tried to like clear up that you guys are just talking past each other. James, all he's looking for you from you in order to move forward is coming to an understanding about what you mean when you say the Father is God. Is that equivalent? Is that the is of identity? And if so, do you affirm that the Father is God is equivalent to that is equivalent to God as the Father? Yes or no?
Yeah, that's not where we're going, Tom. That's not even where
Oh my
my
god.
question
Oh
is
my
coming
god.
from. I'll just have to hit you up later, Jake, when I can reformulate it better.
Okay, let me give you an example. Okay, it's like saying Jake is the Muslim metaphysician and the Muslim metaphysician is Jake. Do you see that? I just switched the ordering of the words around, but do you see any significant difference?
No, but I still don't think that's tracking with what I'm trying to argue or get you to address on that part. So it's something I need to go back to the drawing board on
I didn't think
because
you were
I'm
making
obviously
an
not
argument. I thought we
communicating
were
very
just
well.
talking. I didn't think you were making an argument. I thought we were just talking about it, right?
Well, any time like you put forth a position, it's a semi argument. Like
Yeah,
I'm
but
giving
I
you
don't think you,
kind of
James,
justification.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you have really a settled position, right? Aren't you
No, I
still
don't
trying to
have
figure it
a
out?
I don't have a completely settled position. That I would
Yeah.
definitely agree.
So I thought we were just kind of talking it out and seeing what the options were.
Yeah,
Jake,
but
I think
when
he's
I'm
trying to
when I'm
say
like
with the egg
convinced.
example. So
Yeah.
James,
Go ahead.
I think he's trying to say like with the egg example is like the egg is equal to the shell, yolk, and the white part, and then vice versa. The yolk, the white part, and the shell is equal to the egg, as though that's somehow significantly different.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, but the yolk isn't the egg,
yeah. So
right?
that's clearly
No,
not
because
the
the egg,
case
Shell isn't
because,
the egg.
yeah, because the egg is this is the confusion, right? Because the egg will just be like in one sense, it'd be just like an abstract whole that contains the three particulars, and then if you flip it on the other way, then um, then the egg would be the one concrete thing, and the three particulars would just be, some form of identity. They'd be abstract.
Well, it goes down to the fact that, like, you can't divide an immaterial object. You can divide a material object, but if God is one immaterial object and there are these perspectives from God, which we were calling Father, Son, and Spirit, then naturally you can't divide those, but they would all be, in a sense, equal to the whole, meaning all of them are God.
How are they equal?
But the yolk isn't the egg, the shell isn't the egg, and the white isn't the egg.
In what sense are they equal?
Uh, in the sense that they're all part of this immaterial, and this immaterial can't be divided,
Well, isn't that
Yeah,
partial?
it's a,
which means that they all are a representation of
How do
that
you have
nature.
something not
Yeah, then
divided but
they're
there's
not real.
parts of it?
Yeah, they're not real concrete
yeah.
things. You're just talking to them via abstractions. You're just pointing to the whole egg as it's one concrete thing, and then you're dividing it up by using abstractions, going, oh, but we're going to separate it out. They're not concrete. They're not concrete parts. You're just using identity to point to part of the whole and say, oh, look, this bit's different to the whole. But really, it's all just one thing. So they're not real
Yeah, but
parts.
James, how are you even counting them in the plural to begin with in the way that you're saying that they're perspectives? How are you counting them as more than one thing?
Well, there would be a distinction between how God relates to himself within the Godhead or the Trinity versus how God relates to us. And so we would say perfect unity. And then if you, I don't want to open up the divine simplicity route right now, but so I would say that is where the perspective is that the Father, Son, and the Spirit, that is how we are shown them, but they have a different relationship internally within the three.
Are there real distinctions in the Godhead? Are the Father and Son and Spirit really distinct?
I
Is it just an appearance of distinction, or are they actually distinct?
see. I want to say that there's a distinction, but because I want to hold to divine simplicity and I want to hold to the previous statements, I think I'm forced to say the appearance, and then I think that I'm just in trouble in another's position. So it's something I got to think through.
Okay.
Uh,
Um, yeah, go ahead.
can you check your DMs real quick, Jake?
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. And Tom, maybe you can respond back to the other bit when you
Yeah.
get the chance. I'm just curious because I don't know how it goes, so I was just asking. But so James, I mean, do you know the difference between pure and impure relative identity?
You know what? I've never actually heard that expressed like that, pure and impure. I mean, I know what identity like if in the sense of I am me and I'm not someone else. Is that kind of what you mean, or is there something else with that?
No. So pure relative identity Trinitarianism just basically states that there is no such relation as classical identity whatsoever. Impure relative identity Trinitarianism doesn't necessarily make that claim. Um, it's either agnostic on it or at least affirms classical identity, but it makes the claim that counting, at least when it comes to the Trinity and counting gods, is going to work by some relation other than classical identity. So that's basically the difference.
Yeah,
And then that goes.
Strong or weak relative identity as well,
yeah.
right?
I guess I kind of lumped and dismissed relative identity Trinitarianism pretty quickly. So maybe I need to dig further into some of the
You,
distinctions.
I'm surprised you said that because you're actually defending Vin way back when he was trying to adopt such a position, and
I don't
I'm
know if he
wondering what you
actually
would say about that.
I don't know if he actually holds to that.
He was denying Leibniz's law, quite literally.
I think he was if I correct me if I'm wrong, but he said that um, it's not necessarily a consensus in all philosophy that all philosophers uniformly agree in that. And so he
Yeah, but
was
that's just.
challenging the application of it. Now, maybe he didn't realize what some of the entailments might have been, but I don't think Venn is a relative identity Trinitarian.
I mean, he clearly is, based on the content of what he said, and I think this went over probably your head and John Lee's head as well. I don't know if he's got it at this point either, but you guys thought I contradicted myself, if you remember that discussion when
I
Vin
don't
asked.
remember that part of it.
Okay, well, I'll explain it. When Vin asked, well, if we have the Trinity and it's one in being and three in persons, is that a contradiction, Jake? And I said, no, not yet. And he was going through his little presentation slide. And on the next page, he said, well, the persons are identical to the one being. And now I said, okay, now you've got a problem.
Yeah, that's relative identity.
And I said, okay, now you've got a problem. And then he said, whoa, 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 you just said that there was no contradiction, that there was no problem.
You have
And I
a
said,
good
yeah, of
memory, so
course,
I'll have to
because,
go back and listen. I
yeah,
don't
you can go
recall
back and
saying.
listen, but just let me finish. The
Go ahead.
point is this, but simply stating one being in three persons in and of itself is not a contradiction. However, when you explain the relationship between the being and the persons, that's when you start to run into problems. So when Vin did that on the next page, he either knowingly or unknowingly, I think probably unknowingly at that point, committed himself to some type of relative identity Trinitarianism, in which case I was trying to point out what the problems with it were. And then, all hell sort of broke loose, and we know what happened from there. But he certainly, in that debate, was affirming that position. And you guys just couldn't understand. I mean, it was such a basic point, but you guys couldn't understand why I was saying it was okay on the slide before, but then the next one, now all of a sudden there's a problem. So do you understand why
Yeah,
there's a problem now?
I'll go back and I'll listen to see if he said they were identical because I remember he went into the analogy
He
where he
definitely did.
gave the rocks having a state of being but not having a state of
And you've
person.
used that recently as
Humans
well,
having a state.
Jimbo. You're still using that, dude. So
Yes, because I
you're
really like it.
you're you're still using that example. You're still
That's not
I
using
am.
that
wrong,
I'm
right?
still
example,
using it for
and that's
sure.
why and you got it from Vin, and that's why I'm bringing it up to show how there's a problem, not necessarily with the example, merely to show that there's a distinction between being and person in that case. However, it's what Dale Tuggy calls the first move, okay, in trying to quote unquote solve the problem. It's the first move. Okay, there's a
Y-
distinction between being and person, but it doesn't solve the problem because the
You know
question is,
something.
what's the relationship between the being and the persons?
You know something interesting, Jake. People say that you never admit this, but you've admitted this in like private conversations, public conversations, and I just find it funny that they don't give you this credit. Like you've admitted that you believe that there are logical models of the Trinity, but you don't believe that there's a logical and orthodox model of the Trinity.
Correct.
So because I get like pushback, and I'm like, I think Jake is trying to argue from an intellectually honest position. He's not trying to say that things like partialism on the face value aren't problematic, maybe problematic in other ways, But
all he's saying when he says that there's logical models of the Trinity, it's just going to be cashed out on the model, right? If you mean that there's three distinct, like separate parts or persons, whatever you want to call it, and by you mean that they're one God, that just by that you mean they just have the same like sigil on their vest. Well, then yeah, there's no problem there. That's all he's like. It's not some sort of like grand like, oh, Jake said the Trinity is logical. Oh. It just depends on what you mean by it, right? If
Tom,
you
are you
just mean
concerned
that
that
they
the
all,
statement's going to be
Orthodox Church.
misused or something?
huh?
Are you
I can already tell that what you mean when you say
yeah.
that is not the same understanding that James
Okay,
has when
so
he
let me
invoked it.
clarify that then.
I,
So,
I, I, I think you're wrong, Tom, and you know what happens when you assume. I very clearly know what Jake means by that, and I think most Christians are going to want to maintain some kind of orthodoxy, Tom.
You,
I
okay,
don't know why you keep butting in with this, just not adding to the conversation.
okay,
you,
James, here we go. How about this? You can try to explain what you think I mean by it, and then if I don't think you're correct, I'll explain it. How about that?
So what I think that Jake means by that is that there are logical models of the Trinity that don't pose a logical problem, but he's never seen a logical model can fit with any version of
No,
orthodoxy.
that's irrelevant. This part's
Like it
irrelevant.
falls into heresy. It
The,
falls
Is
into
that
some
what you
sort
meant,
of
the
Jake?
question is not. This is not. No. What I was talking about has nothing to do with the orthodoxy. The question is, what does Jake mean when he says there's the logical Trinity?
I just stated
Period.
it, and you didn't give Jake a
Nothing to
chance
do
to
with
say.
orthodoxy or anything.
You didn't
The
give Jake
question
a
Jake
chance to
asked you
say
is,
yes or no.
what?
I think Tom wanted to finish, but go ahead.
That's what Jake's question was to you.
No, he asked me to explain what I thought he meant. I did, and he was going to say, yes, that's what I meant, or no, that's what I didn't mean, and then you jumped in again, Tom.
Yeah. So, what I mean is pretty much in almost any logical problem, you can do all sorts of tricks and substitute different things instead of other things to solve a problem, right? But what we're concerned with is the content as well, and whether or not the content is actually going to qualify as the Trinity itself. And in many cases, it's not going to. So, for example, when you talk about William Lane Craig's model, well, he sort of solves the tritheism problem because he says the persons of the Trinity are not each fully God, they're parts of God in the same way that a skeleton is part of a cat. However, he is clearly not really stating the doctrine of the Trinity because he doesn't believe that any one of the persons possesses the divine nature. Okay, so that's going to go against all sorts of uh, positions when it comes to the Trinity itself. So
it's
yeah,
heresy. Yeah, it's
you can
heresy.
solve the problem and you can call it the Trinity, and you can say the Trinity is James, Tom, and Jack, but that's not really doing anything because now you're not really talking about the Trinity anymore. You're talking about something else. You understand the point? Was I able to be heard, or what's going
Yeah,
on?
he's just
Yeah,
not
there's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
no
yeah.
response. No response. And now
I have a
Delano is
question.
Baron
Can I?
Sengir. What's up with that?
Can
That's
I
that's
ask
correct.
uh, Muslim? I have a question for you. I have never seen a video you did a critique on like the constitutional model of the Trinity. Have you? Do you know about the constitutional model?
All right, guys. So what you just watched was the tail end. I could not come back to the microphone. My wife had called me at the time, and I had to go in the other room see what she needed. You know, family first. Now, this next small chunk that'll be coming up is a Christian who comes in to challenge Jake on another version of the Trinity. I hope you guys enjoy it. It was a great discussion. I enjoyed when I got to go back and listen to it. Um, Other than that, thank you for tuning in. Also, like and subscribe if you enjoy this content.
And now
I have a
Delano is
question.
Baron
Can I
Sengir. What's up with that?
can I
That's
ask
correct.
Muslim? I have a question for you. I've never seen a video you did a critique on like the constitutional model of the Trinity. Have you? Do you know about the constitutional model that's proposed by Michael Ray in regards to the Trinity?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on it? Because that's my model of the Trinity, the constitutional model. Yeah.
Do you mind? Do you mind explaining it a bit, Adam? The
I
Okay.
would love
constitutional
for
model.
Muslim. Would you like to explain it to you or?
That's your.
Yeah, we heard.
I
Okay, I
mean,
can
Let him
explain it.
answer then,
I can
guys.
But
explain it, but
okay, go ahead.
I'd like you to explain it probably
Sure.
because I'm
So the
interested to see if
constitutional.
you know what it is. Actually.
Okay, so the constitutional model is proposed by a couple of philosophers. One of them is Michael Ray, which is they derived their model from an Aristotelian notion in regards to material objects. So Aristotle viewed material objects as hylomorphic compounds, and of course, Muslim can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's what I understood from Michael Ray. Hylomorphic compounds. So basically, the way Aristotle viewed material objects is that they are compounds of matter and form. Right, a material object is a compound of matter and form, called hylomorphs. Right, and you can you can have these distinct and multiple hieromorphs in the same region, right? And so an example that Michael Ray uses is like the pillar that's constituted by a matter, a certain matter, like a bronze statue, for example, or a statue. Sorry, a statue that's constituted by a lump of bronze, right? So you have this lump of bronze that forms into the statue, right? And that statue can also be a pillar, right? Because it can support things, right? And so it has this property of being a pillar, these properties of being a pillar. And so it can be both a pillar and a statue, but it has distinct properties. These two distinct properties from being a pillar and a statue. So there are these two distinct hylomorphs for the same material object, right? So you have this one material object. It's basically a form of relative identity, right? So you have these two distinct hylomorphs that in relation to the material object they're identical to the material object. In relation to each other they're the same material object but yet distinct hylomorphs. So you have numerical sameness without identity, which is an astatorial conception, right? And yeah, that's basically the model they propose for the Trinity, where you have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit being these distinct. Instead of saying hylomorphs, because the word hylo in Greek means matter, and God is not matter, it's not material, he's spiritual, as the Bible says God is spirit. So you would say that God is a spiritual being that has these three distinct spiritual forms or spiritual morphs, right? The Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. In relation to God, they'd be identical. In relation to each other, they'd be the same spiritual being but distinct spiritual forms, right? Same way with the material object. So you have these three distinct hylomorphs for the same material object. It's basically like what Muslims said before. It's a form of relative identity. It's a weak, impure relative identity, but it does allow for classical identity though, right? For absolute identity to exist, and it is an Aristotelian notion and conception of material objects, right? Where he did view them as distinct multiple hylomorphs without being multiple objects, right? For this, still being one material object. Did I explain it correctly, Muslim, or did I make a few mistakes there?
Yeah, that was actually pretty good. Yeah, that was actually pretty good. Um, so there are a number of problems with the model, and you kind of actually mentioned one. And one big problem is that well, first of all, there's some interpretive dispute about whether or not Aristotle actually held to this position, and Alexander Proust brings this up in one of his articles. But anyway, that's another question. But I'm not going to get too bogged down into that. Um, but one obvious disanalogy and a problem with it is that it's basing this concept on material constitution. And as you said, God is supposed to be spirit or immaterial, and he's not made of matter. And so the question is, well, what's the metaphysical count of this idea? And Ray and Brower basically say, well, there's this sort of immaterial type of stuff that God is made out of, and you have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that's they honestly they need to do a bit more explaining as to what exactly they mean by that. So that part is very unclear in the model itself. And then, although it doesn't necessarily negate classical identity, um, it is counting by a relation other than classical identity, right? So it's saying that, and basically what it amounts to is sort of counting by division or separability rather than identity. And I just, again, I would say that I think that this is the wrong way of counting. I don't think that this is how counting works. This is certainly not how we count today, and especially when it comes to supposed immaterial objects. So, for example, and this is something I pointed out recently, it seems to be problematic that when it comes to the amount of gods that there are, you're counting by division or separability, and you have one God because you have this immaterial stuff that cannot be divided. But when it comes to the number of persons, you're counting by identity because you're saying that there are three persons, not one person. But given the doctrine of perichoresis and the idea that the persons mutually indwell one another and they're inseparable from one another, then it would seem to follow that we should also count that there's one person and not three. But that would also be heretical and problematic. And Christians count by identity when it comes to the persons, in that they count that there's three persons, even though they can't be divided or separable. And so you have an internal conflict when it comes to how you count gods. You count by a relation other than identity, but when it comes to counting the number of persons or the number of attributes, or if you think there are such things as attributes, etc., you count by identity, and that's just inconsistent. So, I mean, I can give other critiques and other reasons why. There have been a number of papers that have been written on this, critiquing the model, but I'll just leave it there for now.
But I have a question for you, Muslim. Like, yes, God is an immaterial object and not a material object. But as long as God is concrete and spirits can take forms, then that can be a model for the Trinity, right? The constitutional model. Because as long as a spirit can take forms, then there you go. You can have a spiritual being that has distinct spiritual forms, right? And these distinct spiritual forms can be identical to the spiritual being in relation to the spiritual being, but in relation to each other, they'd be the same spiritual being, but yet distinct forms, right? So as long as the spirit is concrete and can take forms, then the model can work, right?
I don't think so, because what's playing the role of matter?
The
What's
spirit
playing the
itself,
role of
right? The
matter with the
divine, the
Trinity?
divine substance, like the divine essence, right? Or like the divine, yeah. So instead of having a material essence or a material substance, you would have this divine substance, which would be the spirit, right? The spiritual being, right? Yeah, it has concrete existence, right? It doesn't exist in abstraction or in conception, right? It exists in, it has a concrete existence, right? Muslim, or
Correct. Yeah, it does.
and it can take
But
form,
what's the
right?
relevance
Like,
just by merely being concrete?
yeah,
What's the relevance by being concrete?
yeah, and it can take form, right? This the spirit can take these multiple distinct morphs, right? We can
Yeah,
say.
but do all the forms exist at the
Yeah,
same
they would
time?
exist in the same time. The same thing with the hylomorphs; they exist in the same time, right? The distinct hylomorphs. Yeah, they would have to exist simultaneously. Yeah,
Do they? Do they
yeah,
exist at the same time?
yeah,
So, like, another example is a fist, right, or
yeah.
my
I don't think
hand,
that this is a good example.
and
Yeah, I know that Michael Ray uses that example, right? And I don't think that this is a good example because
why?
because they don't exist simultaneously, right? The hand and the
Yeah,
fist.
but how? Why would you think that the others do?
Yeah, but with the pillar and the statue, they exist simultaneously, right? These
What
distinct
what's
hieromorphs.
what's the difference between the two examples? That you're
So,
granting it for one but not the other.
so the example that Michael Ray also uses that example, and I think he refined his model a little bit, where he says that you have this statue that can also be a pillar simultaneously, right? Where if you take away if you carve away at this material object, it cannot be a pillar anymore, so it loses that distinct property, right, of being able to support objects, but it's still a statue, right, which means that there are two distinct things here, right,
Oh, but
because
you're
there are two
talking about a
distinct.
carving away. You're talking about a process. So in what
That's
sense
at
they
the
exist at the same
hypothetical, yeah,
time?
hypothetically speaking, right? To show the distinction between the two, right? Between that, there are actually two things here, right? A pillar and a
Yeah, but
statue.
in what
So he's
sense are
trying.
they existing simultaneously? Because it seems to assume some type of diachronic relation rather than synchronic.
Yeah, but like the properties of the pillar and the properties of the statue, they exist, simultaneously, right? Like at the same time, right? Like
So, can I ask
there
what the
is no
third
time.
highlight
There
morph
is no
is in
time
the
where one
statue
exists and the
example?
other. Like the properties of the statue exist at the same time as the properties of statue. There is no time where there's a shifting in the properties, right?
But why
Um,
are you saying that's the case for the statue but not the hand? That's what I'm asking.
yeah, because in the hand one, you know, the hand one doesn't really fit, right? Because you have this one hylomorph that keeps on changing forms at different times, right? And I think Michael Ray recognized that, right? And
No, no,
he
but
made
what's
a.
the difference in the properties? It's a difference in the properties because you're allowing for the property to exist
Oh yeah, so
in.
so they are different, right? So it does work, right? But if they existed at the same time, right? But if you have this one hand that keeps on changing at different times,
No.
right?
Yeah, but bro, what I'm asking you is when the hand or exists as a closed fist, let's say,
Yeah.
why are you saying that there are not two objects there? Or why are you saying that there's different properties from when it's opened, but you're not saying that from when you start carving away at the statue? What's the relevant difference?
Oh, so your question is why is the fist hand why is a hand that's in the fist position different from its normal position, right, of being not in a fist, right?
No, that's not what I'm that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking why are you accepting one example that is used by Ray and you're not accepting the other example that's used by Ray? What's the difference between the two
Sure.
examples that makes one incoherent and the other
So
coherent?
the difference is that the hand turning into a fist is modalism, right? But the other one, because it's not simultaneous, right? But the other one is simultaneous, where you
Why?
have these distinct hylomorphs existing simultaneously,
Why?
right? Why what? Sorry.
Why are you saying that it's modalism? Why don't they
Oh,
exist
the
at the
fist
same
and the
time?
hand. Why is it modalism?
Yeah, why
Sure,
don't they exist
because
at the same time?
one of the primary difference, the primary difference between modalism and Trinitarianism is the word simultaneously, right? Where you have these distinct forms, right, and distinct variants, you can say, but existing at different times, which will mean you have this one person that can take on different forms at different times, right? But if you have this material object that has these distinct forms, right, existing simultaneously, being distinct from each other, then you have these two or three or four or five different things
Yeah,
that
I
yet
know
the
what
same.
modalism is. I know what
Yeah, so
modalism is,
that's
bro.
Jake Khalil Aldani just came in. He's in the audience listening to you.
Yeah, that's fine. No, my question is very clear, and I don't think you're really understanding it because you haven't answered it thus far. I'm asking you if you're granting that the lump and the statue, or however way you want to phrase it, have the same properties at the same time. And why are you not granting that for the hand? There's no what's the relevant difference? You haven't established any.
no, but I'm not making the argument that the lump and the statue, right? I'm making the argument of the pillar and the statue, right? That are constituted by the matter, right? So
Yeah,
this is
but
also
you're
refined, right?
this is the point though, bro. You're literally
Yeah.
You're picking and choosing certain examples that Ray has used, and you
in the
have
past,
not
right?
been, yeah, but you have not given a clear example to show what the difference is between them.
Because by the way, Muslim, I don't know if you've seen the latest interview of Michael Ray in terms of his model, right? And he does seem to have refined his model a bit, right? Where it's not like the fist and the hand, at these different times, right? Or the lump and the statue even. No, it's like the pillar and the statue that are constituted by the bronze, right? So because the problem he found is modalism, right? Where if you have this lump that takes into a different form, then there are these two different things existing not simultaneously but at two different times. So the key word here is existing at the same time, right? These two distinct hylomorphs, right? And that's why he refined it a bit and said a pillar and a statue instead of like a lump of bronze and the statue, right? Because if you have the statue, then the lump of bronze doesn't exist, right? When you have a hand and a fist, if the hand takes on the form of a fist, the hand doesn't exist anymore. It's the fist, right? And so you want both the hand and the fist existing simultaneously, right? When the
Yeah,
hand
and how
fails,
do you have that with your example? That's what I'm
yeah, you
pressing
have
you
the
on.
pillar and the statue existing simultaneously
How is that different than the other example? What's the
because
difference? You're just saying they don't exist at the same time. But you're not explaining
yes,
why. You're not explaining how they exist at the same time in one case, but not in the other.
because when the hand takes on the form of a fist, it loses its distinct property of being laid out, right? Not in a fist position, right? And so there's a loss of property here, right?
Oh,
And
it's just a different form of the material.
but the hand doesn't exist anymore, right? It becomes this fist, right? The
Why?
same thing with the lump of bronze, right? When the lump of bronze becomes this statue, it doesn't become a lump of bronze anymore, right? It's the statue now, right? But that's why you have if you have the statue that can also be a pillar, right? Then you have both the pillar and the statue existing simultaneously, right? Constituted by that bronze, right?
I am amazed at your patience, Jake.
Yeah, I don't think
I'm
he's.
about to
I don't
fist
think
this
he's really
conversation. This
under.
is fucking horrible.
I don't think he's understanding. But anyway, we can go back to my other objection that
So yeah,
um,
what would be your
just
objection?
to say, well, I gave you three already, but
So you don't
the
think that
other one,
spirits
going
can
back to
take
the other one,
forms?
that we count by identity, and the way in which we count, even the within the Trinity itself, is by identity when it comes to the persons. So why are there three persons? Because you have three things, or in the case of the Father and the Son, X and
You
Y,
have three
and they're
different
not
forms.
identical to each
You
other.
have three different forms of the same thing, right? Three distinct forms.
Oh, but why do you count them as three?
Oh,
This is
because
the point.
each one has this. So because the object, right, has these properties that makes it take on these different forms, right? So if you take the example of a sun, for example, right, the sun has the property of begetting rays, so it has the property of being a father and a son, because it has the property, it has the form of being a property and the form of being a son, son, right, for
Okay.
the son. So
Are
so
you
God in the same sense,
counting are you counting gods by the same relation that you count persons?
no, right?
Okay, exactly.
It's
So
different.
that's the point. You're inconsistent. You're counting gods differently than you're counting persons. And that's because you don't want to admit that there are three gods.
So I would say that counting gods would be different if they exist in different locations, right? Because all of this is in the same region, right?
The persons don't exist in different locations.
In the same location, right? So if they so if you have the matter existing in the same region, right, then it will become one material
The
object, right?
persons
What makes it
exist in the
become
same
multiple?
region.
Sure, that's why it's one God, right? And it's not
Why
multiple
isn't it one
gods.
person?
If they existed in different regions, then you would have multiple
Why
gods.
isn't it one person?
Oh, because each one has a different form. Because there are distinct property. Because there are properties that
Because
make
they're
these
not
distinct
identical.
morphs. Yeah, because they're not identical, right?
Right. So you're
Because each one,
counting by the number of persons by classical identity, and you're counting gods by some relation other than classical identity.
and that'll be your main objection against the constitutional model of the Trinity.
That's just one objection. But yeah,
How about the objection that you said earlier about like this the constitutional model is talking about material objects, but God is an immaterial object. But nonetheless, as long as an immaterial object can take on forms, then the model can work,
have you
right?
read Craig's paper on this?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I'd suggest you read Craig's paper on this.
I, I I did read an article here in his website, right, where he did say the same thing, right? Where God is not made up of the stuff, right? The stuff between quotes, right? And the material object, the constitutional theory they're talking about, made up of this bronze, right? Of this stuff, right? But God is not made up of that stuff. Is that what Craig says, basically?
Yeah, he goes into a bit of detail, but I thought you said you didn't read it. Now you're saying you
No,
read it.
I read an article about it, right? Which is a small article answering a question, and he talked about it. Yeah.
Oh
You
no,
know
no, he
how he
has an
has the
actual, he has an
question reply.
actual, he has an actual academic article on it, but it's on his website too. You can find it there. I mean, there are a number of critiques. I think Daniel Howard Schneider. I think he wrote
But
a
the thing is,
criticism of
though,
it as well.
Muslim is that what's his name? Dale Tucky says that this solution is neat, right, for the constitutional model
Sorry,
here.
who said this?
And here, Dale Tuggy, and here I'll get it for you right now. The citation exactly. 1 second.
Yeah, can somebody bring up Pedro? This sucks.
Yeah,
Here,
sorry
yeah,
guys.
here. Logically, this is in his work, Metaphysics and the Logic of the Trinity, right? Where he says, logically, the solution is neat. We've been given a non theological reason for thinking that things can be the same F but different G's. And here it is. I'll
Yeah,
send it to you again.
correct. But Tuggy certainly doesn't think that the solution works, right?
Um, he does provide a counter argument against relative identity in general, right? So his argument is against the why he's against this is because he's against relative identity, right? But this model does allow for classical identity, right? For the existence of both classical and relative identity, right? Because you can
But
have only one form.
it counts by an inconsistent relation. That's the point.
So let me ask you this also, Muslim. You would say that this is like the view of Aristotle that he had on material objects, right? Like this was his view. So, and Michael Ray, of
No,
course,
I didn't say that.
because
I
Michael
actually
Ray
said
said
that.
that. Oh, let me send you
Yeah,
Michael
that's
Ray.
fine. Michael Ray can say whatever he wants, but I didn't say that. In fact, one of the first things I said is there's interpretive dispute on whether or not Aristotle actually held to that position. But I'm not making a strong claim about it one way or another because I would have to do more research on that to make such a claim. However, if you're interested, there's a short section in Alexander Pruse's article in which he mentions this, and he admits that you can interpret it differently, but he doesn't actually think that that's correct. So there's dispute about it.
Why does it matter if Aristotle held to it or not?
Well, he asked me, so he just asked my opinion. I don't know. Maybe he
Oh,
thinks
that's
there's a
just
difference.
that's the question. Yeah.
But anyway, Adam, you changed your model radically
Yeah,
from.
from social Trinitarianism. Yeah.
Why is
Because
that?
yeah, William Lane Craig is was one of my role models because I used to be very non-religious, right? And he's the one who convinced me of Christianity, his arguments and his debates, right? So I really looked up to this guy, right? And when it came to the Trinity, I really wanted to follow everything that he says, and I did follow his model of the Trinity. And I wasn't philosophically savvy, and I'm still not, right? Like, but I figured that there are problems with his model of the Trinity after having many
Yeah,
discussions.
because you brought it to me and I
Yeah,
explained
that
why it's
is.
very problematic.
Yeah,
And then, like 2 weeks later, you threw it in the bin.
yeah.
And now, like 6 months to a year later, you're coming with this. So I thought it was kind of interesting.
Because the main problem of it is partialism and you can actually derive a quaternity of it, right? Where you have these four defined things, because you have Cerberus being the fourth thing, right? Cerberus and the three parts of Cerberus, right? And so yeah, you get a quaternity of some sorts, right? And partialism, so it gets into huge problems.
Yeah. So who do you identify the one God as? The Trinity or what?
Yeah, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? So, in the example of the material constitutional theory, to be that one material object or the one spiritual object, right? If we're talking about God, right? That has these three distinct forms or three distinct variants of the same God. Yeah,
Yeah. But do you think the Trinity possesses the divine nature?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So the example that you just brought up before about having four things, uh, you have the same problem. You haven't
No,
solved
but
it at all because
yeah.
you have the Trinity and then you have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Wait, with relative identity, you have this problem. You would have
No,
this
with
problem
what
with
you just
social.
said. You just said you identify the one God with the Trinity. So if the one God is the Trinity, and you have this thing which is God the Trinity, and then you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and presumably they're divine as well. So now you have four things which are divine,
But they're identical
and then you have
to God, right?
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You still have four things which are divine.
Even if they're identical to God, right? But they're distinct. The three
Yeah,
are distinct from each other, so they're numerically the same without identity, right?
yeah, but
But
you
it's just
think that the persons are like modes of the essence, right?
forms or variants, yeah,
Yeah.
existing simultaneously, yeah.
So
But relative to the essence, they are the essence. Relative to each other, they're the same essence but distinct forms, right, or variants of that essence. Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, I think the room is kind of bored with this, bro. No
Yeah, I'm
offense.
sorry. I'm sorry,
So
guys.
I'm gonna
I'm sorry.
pass it on.
Yeah, we
Just
blew past it. I'm sorry.
if
I'm sorry.
anybody else
I'm
wants
sorry.
to
God
talk, I
bless
think there's other people on the stage.
I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die.